Oh, nerds for humanity. I have had the privilege of interviewing a lot of the candidates for Congress from my district, the 16th District of California, Silicon Valley. And I've got Sam Liccardo on the show today. He's got a really interesting background, and I'm excited to get to know him. So, welcome to the show, Sam, and hello, nerds.
Great to be with you, Tom. I I'm loving the opportunity to be in the nerd house. This is fantastic.
Well, if there's any district that can celebrate nerddom, I would
Oh
say
yeah,
it's the 16th. Yeah.
nerds are driving our economy. Thank God for them.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Sam.
Well, I'm a recovering lawyer. I was a criminal prosecutor here in Santa Clara County for several years. I prosecuted cases in the sexual assault unit in the DA's office, and I'd done a stint also as a federal prosecutor as well. And then I ran for office in 2006 for the first time. I ran for city council race in downtown San Jose. Somehow prevailed. I still don't know how I won that race, but I've been serving on the council for about 16 years. I left my role as mayor of City of San Jose in 2022 after two terms. I was reelected and then, of course, termed out. And then I began teaching at Stanford University and Stanford Law School, and had been teaching both at the public policy program and the law school. Had a great time teaching. It was a lot of fun, and loved being on campus. And then I heard that Anna Eshoo was retiring. And suddenly, about 12 weeks ago, my life changed pretty dramatically. So here we are.
Yeah. You mentioned being the mayor of San Jose and being termed out. What's your take as a person who was impacted by term limits? When you look back, do you feel like, man, I wish I had a third, or do you feel like, no, this is the way it should work? People, there should be like kind of a refreshing of faces every now and then.
Yeah, two things can be true. One is being the mayor of a large city is a fantastic job. It's an incredible opportunity to have a real impact in a community you care about, right? And where your family lives, where your friends and community and neighbors
Hmm.
are. That it's a wonderful, wonderful gig. But I never believed in term limits until I got into office, and now I firmly believe in them. I think it's a great thing. I think that look, all of us get a little sclerotic over time in terms of how we think. We have hardened friends and enemies, and those kinds of relationships, I think, need to be broken up over time. And we need fresh blood. So I'm a big believer in term limits, and I think my wife is an even bigger believer, especially after 8 years of being mayor of San Jose. She was pretty happy to have a little break.
What do you think is a reasonable period of time for a congressional representative to represent a district?
I don't know the answer, and I guess I haven't thought much about it because, as I understand it, it would probably require a constitutional amendment. I think the Supreme
Hmm.
Court said it's not really going to be up to any states to decide. So, since that seems like a bit of a ways off, I'd be happy to set the number at something less than the current number, because, like, the truth is, you know, we we have to recognize our own humanity and our fallibility, and over time, I know that. I don't get any faster. I don't think anybody does. I think it's an appropriate time for all of us to retire after a certain number of years. And regardless of age, really, it's really just an issue of needing new ideas,
Hmm.
new decision makers, new ways of thinking. It's so important to retain a vitality in a democracy. You see what happens in, take mayors in cities, for example, in those cities where, you see mayors reign for decades at a time. It doesn't make for better governance.
What are some of the new perspectives or new ideas that you'd want to bring to Congress?
Well, I think it's not hard to look at Congress and say it's broken. I know I'm not the first person to say that, but it's a uniquely unproductive moment. In fact, I think Axios said this is the least productive Congress in half a century, at least as far back as they could measure. And that's actually saying something because it's a pretty low bar.
Hmm.
What so what I think we critically need is we need folks who are committed to actually work across an aisle and get things done. And I'm certainly I'm a Democrat and I'm going to fight for things we got to fight for. I'll fight for reproductive rights, of course. I'll fight for voting rights. I'll fight for things that I care passionately about. But when we move beyond the principle and it's just about getting things done, we need to be able to set aside the inclination to essentially weaponize issues in the next election and find ways to actually get things done. And you have to do that as a mayor, right? As a mayor, you don't have any choice, because when people are telling you at the grocery store, at the gym, about a burglary or a homeless encampment or a pothole, whatever it might be, first of all, you hear about it all when you're the mayor. People hold you responsible. Unlike legislators who can sort of point the finger at the other party and say, well, we didn't get anything done because that blankety blank other party. But there's a certain sense of accountability that's appropriate and that I really loved as a mayor, because people knew I had to respond, and I responded. And maybe I didn't always respond perfectly or well, but they knew that I would be accountable. And I think we critically need that in Congress right now. We need a sense of accountability for actually getting things done, and not simply for putting out a press release saying, see, we held to our guns ideologically and we didn't get anything done because of that horrible other party. We've got to get out of that box. And, so what I did when I first heard about Anna retiring was I started to write down some ideas. I had to convince myself that it was worth serving in a Congress that seems so dysfunctional. How can we actually get things done? So I started writing down ideas in different areas around homelessness and crime, high cost of living, high cost of utilities. How can we actually have a meaningful impact on the quality of life in our communities with changes in Congress? What can we actually get passed in a divided Congress that we could get some Republican and Democratic votes for? And so I started writing these ideas down. And then it became a little obsessive, and then eventually it became a book. So my wife put up with a lot of typing at 3 a.m. And that's now on my website. It's called Let's Get It Done. And the basic idea is, look, we know we're not going to necessarily hit home runs in a deeply divided Congress, but let's at least start hitting some singles and doubles to address some of these critical issues we're facing, like homelessness and high cost of housing, high cost of utilities. There are things that Congress can do to help us and partner better with local communities, but we've got to get out of that box.
What would you have done if you were in Congress now and there's discussion of, let's say, the border bill that the Senate approved, but there was a lot of criticism on the left saying that, the Democrats have given up too much, and then there's criticism by Trump on the right saying it's an open borders bill. What would you have? How would you have kind of evaluated that, and how would you have voted?
Yeah, I'm not naive to the fact that Trump certainly changes the equation for a lot of Republicans. This is going to take a lot of work for an incoming member of Congress, and frankly, a lot of years of work to start to build relationships of trust on the other side, where you can get folks to actually start crossing the aisle. But let me just say on that issue, I support investments in border security at the same time that, I think that we can have a fairer immigration system too. I want to see comprehensive immigration reform. I want to see more H-1B visas, so we can actually, let's staple a green card to every diploma of every student who's here, and make sure we continue to have a workforce that is drawn from around the world with the best talent. I think we can do both of those things. But it seems to me one thing we probably need to tell a speaker who is concerned about a challenge from the right. First of all, let me just say, it doesn't get any better when the Republican speaker gets challenged. We saw what happened with McCarthy. It just keeps getting worse. And we know whoever's going to replace the next speaker is going to be even farther to the right. So it's probably a good idea for Democrats to get together and say, look, let's let aid to Ukraine and some kind of compromise over border security get to the floor of the House. And if necessary, we'll support you as long as Republicans hold the House, right? Obviously, when Democrats take over, we get our own speaker. But the point is we know it's only going to get worse as long as there's just more chaos on the Republican side, and they just get a more and more extreme speaker. I just think there are opportunities here for us to try to get legislation to a floor for a vote where we know we have the votes, and we know that there are enough Republicans that support aid to Ukraine, for example, that was in that package. Let's get it over the goal line.
So speaking of Ukraine, there's now that's been separated out, as far as I understand, where Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel aid is like a $94 billion proposal. Yeah. There's a lot of debate on that. I think it seems like most Americans are generally in favor of continuing to aid Ukraine's self-defense. More debate on the Israel side. What's your read on that? I think right now the way the bill's written, it's doesn't have a lot of conditions for the 14 billion for Israel's military aid. What's your take?
Well, I would support what we have now. I think we critically need to get aid to Ukraine. We've got a country that is, I think we all know it was within days of the failure of that, or a stoppage of that bill on the House side, that we saw a key city fall in Ukraine. We have to do everything we can to support Ukraine. And so it seems to me, as long as Ukraine aid is part of that bill, that is a strong motivator for me to support it, because we know what happens if Putin takes Ukraine. The next step is obviously going to be a country to which we owe allegiance under NATO to commit our own troops. So we are absolutely, we have to be committed to supporting Ukraine. On the Israel question, I think a lot of folks aren't aware that there are existing conditions in the Foreign Assistance Act. There are existing conditions in the Arms Control Export Act that require, for example, that aid used by a foreign country can only be used in legitimate self-defense, can only be used for measures that are legitimate and do not amount to human rights abuses. And the question is whether or not Congress is going to exercise its authority under the existing law for oversight. And it seems to me that's where the path is if people are concerned about how the military aid is being used.
So based on what you've seen, I guess in the last few months after October 7th, do you feel like the IDF and the Netanyahu administration has been prosecuting their response in a way that's consistent with how we would want our military aid to be used?
Well, that's a different question than the question of whether or not it fits in those particular requirements under the FAA or the Arms Export Control Act. But so let me just say that those are different issues. But look, I've been very clear in speaking with supporters of Israel as well as more publicly that I'm not a fan of Netanyahu. I don't like how this war has been executed. Obviously, it's easy for me to say because I don't live in a country that just suffered a grievous terrorist attack that resulted in 1,200 deaths on October 7th. So obviously, we have to couch everything we say with a certain amount of understanding, particularly when we don't live in a country that is being attacked by a terrorist group, namely Hamas, that calls for the elimination of our nation. That is exactly in their charter. So it is certainly easy for me to play Monday morning quarterback. But no, I don't like the idea of using 2,000-pound munitions in heavily residential neighborhoods. I don't like the idea of bombing refugee camps. I don't like the idea of displacing 2 million Palestinians and forcing them to be homeless and not ensuring that there's adequate provision for their medical care and their food. Now, all that being said, let's also be clear about our own response when we've been attacked by terrorists. I mean, we know that the World Trade Center attacks on September 11th were horrific. The result was an invasion of Afghanistan. And I think the last count I saw was that, Americans were responsible for killing more than 43,000 Afghanis in attacks that we know the majority of those folks were not terrorists. We know that the majority of the folks that were killed were civilians. So we have to acknowledge that we don't come at this with this is not a simple issue. And it's easy for us to condemn and point fingers. But if you're asking me, do I support the approach that Netanyahu has used? No, I do not. I believe that Israel has a right to use military force. I don't agree with the way that Israel has used that force. It seems to me the objectives need to be to take out Hamas and to get hostages released. What we're seeing is that for the most part, the highest level operatives in Hamas that have been taken out, really the most prominent one was actually killed in Lebanon, not in Gaza. And hostages get released a lot more effectively during the periods of of a cessation or a pause in the fighting, and we've seen many more hostages released that way than we have through actual liberation. Actually, only 3 have been liberated by military forces, and actually, as many people have been killed that way through military attacks. So, I think we have to be mindful that this is complex. It's hard. It's easy to criticize. But I have severe concerns about Netanyahu's approach, and I particularly feel strongly that Israel cannot continue to occupy Gaza over an extended period of time, because I think that's going to be bad for Israeli security. I think it's going to be bad for Palestinians who live there, and I think it's going to be bad for the world.
So if you were in Congress and that aid bill that had bundled Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel together, if it came to your vote today, would you support it?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I would support the bill. Yeah.
Okay. What is a topic, Sam, that we haven't touched on that you feel is really important for this district?
Well, I thought we might be talking about tech, since
that's right.
Last I checked.
What's a minor area for this district? Yeah. What's your read on tech, and what should Congress do or not do?
About all tech?
Yeah.
Okay, well, in 30 seconds or less. Well, I guess it would be helpful if Congress would actually act, for one thing. I mean, Section 230 hasn't been amended since 1996. You got everybody pulling their hair out over child safety, and there's some pretty obvious solutions around setting some basic standards for better age verification, and prohibiting push notifications to minors, and not collecting data and so forth. There's some pretty simple standards that could be set that aren't being set. As we look at AI, we had an agreement with 7 top AI companies with the White House around some basic provisions last year around transparency and mandates for example, to ensure that AI models would be tested independently before they be launched, and we'd get watermarks on AI generated images, things like that. Now, if 7 companies that are leading the technology can agree to it, then that should be at the very least, a baseline for beginning the regulation, right? We should be able to put those things in place. And my concern is that because Congress isn't acting, Europe acts, as we saw with privacy, for example. And because Congress isn't acting, then all these state legislatures decide, we're going to start legislating in this space. So we have California and Colorado coming up with their own AI regulations. And the problem is that then you got companies trying to navigate this thicket of 50 different sets of regulations, which is pretty unbearable. So we need to have federal standards. We need a Congress that's actually going to get something done. And again, this comes down to my original point. They're not getting anything done. And obviously it needs to be well informed by the best minds in the Silicon Valley. And I'm not saying that means, let's just go have a bunch of apologists for big tech in there. I think there's plenty of cynical and skeptical people in Silicon Valley too, and who are very sober about the realities and the impacts of technology and the world. Cryptocurrency bill and stablecoin has been sitting around for 3 sessions. Nothing's moved forward. And, I'm talking to crypto folks who are telling me we're begging for regulation. This is the Wild West. And instead, they're having, again, to navigate this thicket of different regulations in different states. So, overall, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here for Congress to move forward in a way that can actually support technological development in our country and ensure that we have a stable regulatory regime. But we need Congress to lean in, and obviously it would help if we had a Congress that was better informed.
So when you look at the latest developments around AI, are you optimistic? Are you terrified? A little bit of both? Like, how do you see this affecting society?
Well, I think like everyone, I have a pretty conflicted view of it. I read Kevin Scott's book recently, which I think was very good about, the opportunities for AI. And there is great opportunity here, and we shouldn't ignore that. And particularly as we think about, for example, medical innovation and treatment and so forth, there could be some real advances that could enable much better provision of medical care, at least diagnosis. And in many communities where we have a real shortage of medical personnel. And so I think it's a great opportunity for AI. At the same time, I think we all know there is great potential harm. And we need a Congress that is attuned to that and starts to set some bumpers in the bowling alley. And we don't have that yet. And it seems to me, for example, let's make sure that every AI company is disclosing how their large language models are scraping data, so at least we can detect where the systemic risks are. There's some basic transparency requirements that we could put in place that I don't think would impede innovation, but certainly would go a long way to making the world a safer place.
I remember, I think it was like maybe a year ago, the CEO of TikTok was in Congress, and it was interesting in that in the past, I don't feel like we've had to think about kind of global competition for innovation as much as we might have to now. We've had quite a lead over the whole world for some time. As we talk about these regulatory areas, what do you say to the CEO in Mountain View or Palo Alto or wherever for some startup saying, hey, I've got to compete, and my competition isn't just here in the Bay Area or New York. They're in, Moscow and, Shenzhen and wherever else, and they're not playing by these rules.
Right.
So we're going to get slowed down, and we're going to get leapfrogged.
Yeah, obviously there's not a simple solution when you're dealing with international technological competition, but certainly it would go a long way. We started with more effective enforcement of trade secret and IP regulation, and I certainly support the use of trade sanctions where China is violating in those spaces. And look, the fact that we're regulating doesn't mean somehow or another that regulation has to impede technological innovation. I'm having those same CEOs come to me saying, we are begging for some regulation because what we have now is a Wild West. And that just encourages the worst behavior, and it undermines our ability to innovate in a way that actually gets us to a product or a service that's going to provide some positive benefit in the world. I have never heard so many leaders in the technology space tell me we are desperate to get Congress moving to get something done. Usually they are all telling me, please keep Congress away from us and keep the rest of the regulators away. Now, obviously, there's good and bad regulation, and we know there's a very big difference between the two. But it seems to me this is actually a moment for Congress to move, not to sit on its hands.
All right, last question for you, Sam. Actually, is from the live chat from Vaughn, who's saying, "Oh, this is interesting. What do you think if Congress actually works from their home districts versus being kind of hunkered down in the Beltway, and they just vote over Zoom? What's your take on that setup? Because I have talked to other people in Congress who basically, they kind of decamp from their district and they buy property, or they end up kind of becoming really distant from their constituents.
Yeah.
And not to mention, it can be difficult for a family if the whole family doesn't move over there.
Yeah, in my own personal circumstance, we don't have kids. My wife and I don't have the resources to go buy a house in another state though either. So we'll probably just get a little apartment. We'll be quite happy to continue to live here, and I'll be spending every weekend here as much as possible, obviously, given the fact we have to vote routinely back in Congress. Look, I appreciate the intent of the question, and I think the question goes on to say it would make it hard for lobbyists to corner politicians if folks are staying at home. I'm quite confident, though, in the ability of lobbyists to get on a plane and get on Zoom as well. They're not under-resourced. I guess my big concern is this. When I first worked on Capitol Hill for Norm Mineta, he was a wonderful congressman. I know many folks remember. I also served as a cabinet secretary to two presidents. I worked for him in the late 80s and early 90s. In those days, we had a speaker, Tip O'Neill, used to go have beers with a Republican president, Democratic speaker and Republican president, in order to resolve issues around Social Security and immigration and so forth. And they struck some pretty historic deals. And they did it because they actually had a personal relationship. My experience of going through COVID and watching city council meetings devolve over Zoom is that relationships get only more frayed and more distant. And that's not a good thing to have individuals who are voting on the same bill who don't also have some sense of the humanity of the other individual who may be on the other side. We critically need a Congress that is capable of getting beyond the very deep acrimony that has us frozen right now. And that requires actual relationship. We have to go back to being human beings again, as the title of this podcast might suggest. Humanity actually matters in this business. In my experience, the way I was able to get things done as mayor in very divisive situations, we had big battles over things like pension reform and defunding the police, all kinds of things I can tell you, protesters and very deep battles. And the way we got through it is usually through a conversation. And a very human approach where I was able to reach across the aisle to somebody who didn't agree with me, maybe opposed me in the last election. And we found some way to find a path forward. And that was almost always better for the city that I served than the stalemate was. And in some cases, it was critical for the city that I served. And I think that's critical for our nation.
Sam, you mentioned the difficult issues you had to deal with as a mayor of San Jose, and one of them was crime and policing. I would be curious to get your take on the current state of crime and policing, because even in my neighborhood, I've been chatting with a lot of neighbors, and we've noticed wow, there's a car break-in.
Yep.
Almost every week now, and sometimes it's well organized, 5-10 cars get broken in.
That's right. It is well organized.
And I live in a pretty suburban part of the Bay Area. We're not deep in San Francisco. What's your take on? I'm in Palo Alto.
Okay.
Yeah. In Duvnik. Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, I resisted the call to defund the police when I was a mayor because at the time San Jose already had the most thinly staffed police department in the country, and I was working mightily to actually add police. I think in my experience, the communities that were struggling the most with crime were the lowest income communities. Told me often in Spanish or in Vietnamese or another language, we really want more cops here. So it was very clear to me that the call to defund was not one that was well founded based on the experience of people who were struggling the most with crime in our community. And as a result, the good news is, although we struggle with crime like every other big city does, San Jose, by 2022, we had the lowest homicide rate of any major city in the country, among the top 50. And that was, I think the result of a lot of hard work trying to rebuild a police department that had been decimated before I got there. We lost more than 500 officers through battles over pension reform and pay cuts and so forth. And I had to work hard and negotiate very tough agreements that still saved us billions of dollars in pension costs. At the same time, we were able to add more than 200 officers and continue to build the department. So look, there's no substitute, I believe, fundamentally for the fact that we still need cops. There are a lot of alternatives, yes, and we invested in a lot of those alternatives. We certainly need more civilian response to many of the crimes or many of the calls for service that cops may be responding to now. They may not need a police officer, but I can tell you, for example, on a domestic violence call, I sure as heck don't think anybody else is going to show up other than a cop because we know more officers get shot and killed in those kinds of encounters than any other. So we have to at least disabuse ourselves of the notion that somehow or another we can live in a world free of cops. That's not the reality. What I put forward in my book that I mentioned before, entire chapter on crime, is how we can get some bipartisan support for actions that Congress can take to really help local communities. I mean, you mentioned the break-ins. You're right, they are coordinated. And we see retail thefts being very coordinated too. There are theft rings that are very well organized and orchestrated. They might be using, some mope to do the stealing, But that mope is armed with a calculator to make sure that they're not stealing more than $950 because they
Mhm.
know that they steal less than the felony threshold. It's going to be pretty much impossible for anyone to arrest them under the law. And so those are the kinds of things that are creating great challenges for lots of communities. And what I propose is having a uniform federal threshold for theft offenses so that we can have federal local partnership in the same way. When I was a federal prosecutor, we had the same partnership on international narco trafficking cases, and to allow local police to arrest on a federal charge doesn't mean everybody goes to jail or prison on that charge, but at the very least to make the arrest. We need to have arrests so that way those arrests are then in a system where we can actually identify who's doing the stealing and hopefully work up the chain, as prosecutors usually can with good investigators, to go get the folks who are organizing the ring. But that has to start with arrest, and you need to have some consequences for the theft. And right now, there are no consequences, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Sam, any final thoughts? Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we only have a few days before everybody's got to turn in their ballots. What's your closing remarks?
Well, I think everybody deserves to know before they vote how we're going to vote. And I've been very clear and explicit about how I'm going to vote. I put it in a book that's far too long for anyone to read without going to sleep. I think it's about 90 pages about how we're going to address our biggest challenges like homelessness and the challenges of housing affordability and the lack of affordable childcare and lack of affordable utilities. We're seeing the utility rates go through the roof. There are federal actions that we can take. There are things that Congress can do. And I've been very specific about what I think we can do. I hope folks will take the time to look at that plan. It's on my website, samliccardo.com. So they have a clear idea how I'm going to vote before they vote.
Thank you so much, Sam. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and best of luck on Tuesday.
Tom, I'm not going to sleep for 4 days, but I will have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
You're going to have a restful Wednesday. That's for damn sure. I'll talk to you later, buddy.
Take care,
Bye.
Tom.
All right. Sam Liccardo. I think now we've had 7 of the 10 candidates running for U.S. Congress from my home district on the show. And I've got a playlist for all of them. I'll put it in a link in the description. But that was cool. I'm going to give you my read on Sam and be curious to hear what your thoughts were. But before I do that, you know what we got to do. We got to thank the people who make this channel, they keep it running. It's our channel members who, through their support, we can cover some of our costs around streaming software, podcast hosting fees, that kind of thing. And I'm going to try and upgrade my microphone. So I don't know. I think we're always trying to make the channel a little better. And let's just start with our biggest supporter, who is Soldier One. And that is at the senior vice president of the Nerds for Humanity organization level. And if you want to support this content, help us keep going, just go and click the join link on YouTube. Soldier One did 46 months ago, and he's been supporting us ever since. At the vice president level, Kristen Slevin and Bike. Kristen has been a member for 50 months. Thank you so much, Kristen and Bike. Hardcore Nerds, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, Unkiyu, and now Barbara, who just joined yesterday. And then at the verified level, it's only $1.99 a month. You can scroll through here and see all of our amazing Nerds for Humanity members. Really appreciate all the support. It helps me kind of stay motivated knowing that, yeah, we're not the biggest channel on YouTube, clearly. But there are people who appreciate the conversation, and so we'll keep doing it. Now, in terms of Sam, why don't we do this? Let's go to ofthepeople.us and I'll write a review of him. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Whoops. Of the people. Oh, we got to get our background music too. Sorry, guys. Got to get the wrap-up music going. This is original music that was composed partly through funds from channel members. So that's another example where you become a member, it all goes back to making better content, and now you have this nice little background music that is licensed. Okay, and actually was originally composed for our show. We were going to do a review of Sam. Okay, so we're going to go here, ofthepeople.us. You can see I filtered it by CA-16. Go to Sam. You see I already gave him an approval vote, but now I could write a review down here. Sam, as the former mayor of San Jose, brings a lot of experience. He also worked for Mineta and has taught at Stanford. He strikes me as a solid moderate, willing to share how he would vote on controversial topics, and brings a balanced and even steady hand. Yeah, there you go. Submit. So there you go. And then if you look at the other CA-16 candidates, let me log out. Now say CA-16. I'm logging out because I don't want you guys to see who I've approval voted. Although I'm guessing you can probably imagine. Let's see. So if you look at trending, who's been getting approval votes lately, you have Ahmed, Sam, and Peter, and Julie, and Joe. But if you sort by all time, Evan Lowe is very strong, as is Rishi. Rishi's like, this is his third run. Greg Tanaka, Ahmed, and Julie. Then you've got Sam, Joby, Peter, Joe, and then Peter right now has the least number of approval votes. So go check out ofthepeople.us, and if you're like, oh, I don't know much about Evan, you can just click on his thing, watch a video, actually one of my interviews with him, and then read a little bit of his background, see some reviews, have access to his Twitter and his website, and then you can see other candidates in the district as well. So thanks to all the people who support Of the People. The supporters on Patreon, and if you want to support ofthepeople.us, it's a nonprofit volunteer project. Just a few of us work on it. Eric, Elizabeth, Aaron, John, Rob, Timothy, Jessica, Trickle Up, Muhan, Travis, Dylan, and Frank. And our volunteers are myself, Ian, Aaron, and Shay. All right, so my thoughts on Sam. You saw my review. It would not surprise me if he makes the top two. So we'll see. California has a great system where we have basically an open primary, so the top two candidates, irrespective of party, go on to the general. Sam might be there. It would be nice to see one of the kind of up-and-coming folks who, you know, like a Ahmed or a Julie or a Rishi or a Greg get in there. But we'll see what happens. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And if you can't become a member and support our content that way, the next best thing you can do is like and share. And then let me know if there are other guests you'd like to see on the show in the comments. I read them all. Bye, nerds.